All right, I have a great show for my audience today. I have with me Scott Ritter, who is a former Marine and UN weapons inspector. He is very, very knowledgeable about the truth of what's really going on in this Russia-Ukraine war. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, a lot has happened since the last time you and I spoke, so I'm just going to jump right in. Within the last day or so, down in the southern part of Ukraine, there was a dam called the Kakova Dam. Ukraine is accusing Russia of blowing up the dam. It's caused tremendous amounts of damage. Citizens are fleeing for their life. Livestock is drowning. It's an ugly situation. However, Russia is accusing Ukraine of blowing up the dam. Can you give us any insight to what's going on with this situation? And do you have any suspicion about who is really behind the exploding of this water infrastructure, this dam in South Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that this is a horrific event, and it's going to impact the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Um, it it's not going to be reversed for some time, meaning that the damage that's being done is as near to permanent as it's going to get. This is changing in a dramatic fashion the lives and the livelihood of millions of people. There will be an ecological impact too on not just the river but also the Black Sea, and so this is a catastrophe, not just a minor little incident. This is a very, very big deal. Um, who did it? One of the key questions that people ask in the legal profession when something of this nature occurs is the concept of a cui bono. Who benefits? Who benefits the most from this? Um, there's no benefit for Russia whatsoever. Um, you, you know, this flooding is primarily impacting what they call the left bank of the Dnieper River. That's where the Russians had built fortifications. They had extensive minefields. They had entrenchments, et cetera. Those are all flooded. They're gone. So why would Russia build a network of defenses only to flood it out? Um, Two, the Russians were using the reservoir that was north of the dam as a water barrier to hold the Ukrainians back. By blowing up the dam, you're draining this barrier, making it actually easier for the Ukrainians to cross the river. And when you use the water as a barrier, that means that you've incorporated that into your defensive plan. And by eliminating that barrier, it means the potential for Russia's defenses in that area being inadequate to the task of defending against a concerted Ukrainian attack is real. So Russia doesn't benefit from this militarily. From standpoint of the economy, two things. One, this will severely impact water supplies to the Crimea Peninsula. The Crimea Peninsula operates on a canal that's fed by the river, and the disruption of the flow of this river will impact that. So it's going to severely reduce the amount of water available to the Crimea. And this is after Russia made a point of reopening this canal and getting the water flowing back in. So again, that's Russia shooting itself in the foot for doing this. It also will have a potential detrimental impact on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. When Russia is in the business of trying to convince the world that this plant is safe, that continued operation under Russian control is in the best interest of the world, why would it create the conditions that allows the world to question the safety of this plant? Now, everything I just said means that it is Ukraine that benefits the most from this conflict. And there's an additional aspect to this. There's a lot of Ukraine fatigue right now. The world is just tired of Ukraine, tired of funding Ukraine. There's been talk about this counteroffensive. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's not going to succeed, and the world knows it's not going to succeed. Ukraine knows it's not going to succeed. So what Ukraine needs is a catastrophic event that rallies international support around Ukraine by blaming Russia for something big. And already Ukraine is talking about taking this issue to the Security Council of the United Nations and using it as a mechanism to get more sanctions imposed on Russia. So politically, it's Ukraine that's benefiting the most from this. And lastly, is the direct forensic evidence. Ukraine has been shelling this dam, striking it with multiple launch rocket systems, HIMARS, the American provided HIMARS system, for months now. It's not Russia attacking the dam. It's been Ukraine attacking the dam. And it was a Ukrainian general who last year said, we need to practice destroying this dam because there could come a time when it's in our benefit to destroy this dam. And they actually tested out by firing HIMARS rockets against it. And the conclusion he reached was, yes, we can destroy this dam anytime we want to. Russia actually warned the world about this potential back in October when they published a letter at the Security Council of the United Nations. So I think if we take politics aside, all the political statements, we just look at the direct evidence and who benefits. It's clear that Ukraine is the culprit. They benefit from this the most. They're the only ones who have practiced taking out the dam publicly. They've acknowledged this, and they're the only ones who've been attacking the dam on a regular basis. So Ukraine did this. Whether the United States is going to come to that conclusion, whether the international community will come to that conclusion is another question. But there's no doubt in my mind that Ukraine is behind this attack.
Well, and it is considered a Russian occupied area, right? So Russia has gone to great lengths to free their own citizens within Ukraine. Why would they then attack their own Russian occupied area, which downstream would damage them in multiple locations? It doesn't make sense. And again, the media is going back and forth. It's such a new story, but they do seem to want to, as you mentioned, turn this into an international crime very, very quickly without any fingerprints or evidence or anything like that. One of the articles that I read this morning said that there will be an investigation from Ukraine and the international community, but already this is being labeled as terrorism and eco-terrorism. Do you think that they're elevating it to that level of language, again, to rally the international community to Ukraine's side?
Well, first of all, let's just be straight up. It is an act of terrorism. And it is an act of eco-terrorism. Whoever's responsible for this can rightly be labeled a terrorist entity that has committed eco-terrorism. So there's nothing wrong with those terms. The problem is they're using them they're applying them on Russia when it's Ukraine that did this. And they need to be careful about applying these terms. Beware of what you ask for, because a careful forensic investigation will probably point the finger straight at Ukraine. So you're going to see people talking about the need for an investigation, but there will be no investigation. Just like, for instance, there's been no investigation of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosion. Why? Because they don't want to know the answer, because they know the answer. They know who did it. America knows who did it. We did it. So we don't want an investigation that proves that. We prefer to leave it unknown so that we can then shape the narrative by putting out false accusations against Russia. And I think that's what you're going to see with this dam. They're going to elevate the language. They're going to create the perception of terrorism and eco-terrorism, and then they're going to apply that to Russia. They're going to go through the motions of talking about an investigation in order to promulgate the notion of legitimacy of these accusations, but there will be no investigation, because an investigation will uncover things that they don't want uncovered.
Yeah, and that's the point I was trying to make is, again, I'm comfortable with this being terrorism. I mean, look how many hundreds of thousands of people it's going to affect. I mean, this is greater than hitting an apartment building with, a sonic missile or a hypersonic missile. This is like very, very damaging to the landscape, to the people, to the culture. My worry, though, is that there won't be a legitimate investigation. It will be, hey, we have the crime, now go find the person, versus really finding out who did that. And I agree that's what's happening, I believe, with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Let me bring up something that came out in the news today, and maybe we can just kind of pick this story apart. I read in Reuters that the CIA has now come forward and said that they know who attacked the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. that it was a 6-man SEAL team from the Ukrainian Special Forces that blew it up. Now, the Daily Mail says the CIA is saying that, but really what the CIA is trying to cover up is the fact that within the leaked Pentagon papers from Jack Teixeira, it says in that the United States knew 3 months in advance about the detonation of this by Ukraine. But here's the whole point of all of this is whether the United States did this or whether the CIA or these Pentagon papers show that it was indeed a team from Ukraine. Why would the United States stand by idle and allow a partner and a NATO nation of Germany to be economically damaged, financially damaged, physically damaged in order to benefit Ukraine, who isn't a part of NATO, who doesn't really have a relationship with the United States? Why in either scenario was the United States so willing to throw Germany under the bus?
Well, first of all, the notion that Germany is this close ally of the United States is a wrong notion. Remember under the Obama administration, it was exposed that we were tapping into the phones of Angela Merkel, the chancellor of Germany. We were spying on her personal phone calls. Do friends do that? No. Also understand that we have been at odds with Germany over their energy policy vis-a-vis the Soviet Union and then later Russia since the 1960s, 1970s. We've been telling Germany, West Germany, and then unified Germany, you don't want to become over-reliant upon Russian energy. And so Germany's insistence on gaining access to cheap Russian oil, cheap Russian gas has been problematic from an American standpoint. And we've been talking about shutting down these pipelines for some time now. Senator Ted Cruz has led the charge in the Senate to bring this about. And it was Joe Biden himself back in early last year, early like this year, I guess, said with Olaf Scholz right there in front of him that if the Russians, he said it in 2022, if the Russians make a move on Ukraine, we will shut down the pipeline. It will cease to exist. That's a confession right there. So we wanted this pipeline shut down, and I believe the evidence will eventually show that we were not only cognizant of it, but that we facilitated it. I don't know if this is a Ukrainian SEAL team. I don't know if that's a cover story by the CIA to cover up an American SEAL team. But the bottom line is we wanted this to happen. We made it happen. We're glad it happened. Look at the glee in Victoria Nuland's voice as she talks about this explosion. Listen to Ted Cruz as he's ecstatic over this happening. There's nobody in the administration that's unhappy that this occurred. Now, if Germany was our close ally and a $12 billion piece of critical energy infrastructure was destroyed, causing Germany to sink into a recession, which is what they are right now. Germany's economy used to be the most powerful in Europe. It's in recession because of this. We are responsible. We should be concerned about that. If they were truly our friends, we'd be articulating, hunt down the culprit. We'd be demanding to find out who the culprit was. But that's not what's happening. We won't allow an investigation to go forward. We have put the political or diplomatic pressure on everybody in the region to say there will be no investigation. This is why Sweden said, we know who did it, but we're closing it down because to talk about this would hurt our national security interests. Now, this is Sweden that's getting ready to join NATO, so it's not as though they're afraid of irritating the Russians. They're afraid of irritating the United States. So I think what this exposes that the United States, in the case of Germany, and I would say in the case of many nations, is a friend in name only, because friends would never do to a friend what the United States has done to Germany.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. All these major newspapers keep putting out different stories, right? Like the New York Times said, "Oh, we now know for a fact it was this sailboat team. They went down and they planted this, and the United States had no knowledge of it." Now this story suddenly shows up. Then it's in these leaked documents that nobody really cared that they were being leaked until it benefited the current administration to put a lid on it. Um, is this all just misinformation that's part of war, or is this new to this current administration?
Well, unfortunately, it's not new to this current administration. It has become a trend, and I think one could take it back to uh, I mean, we can go back to, the Vietnam era and Lyndon Johnson's administration. I mean, the whole Pentagon Papers that were leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, uh, dealt with the lies being told to the American public, being told to Congress by the U.S. Military, by the U.S. intelligence community. We've seen this throughout, with the Iran Contra issues. We've seen the U.S. lie about the buildup to the Iraq War. We've seen the U.S. lie about Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the U.S. government is in the business of lying to the American people, and they do it by leaking information, by shaping the information spectrum with leaks designed to create perceptions, to dominate what the American people think is real. And so it's not unique to this, but it is not unique to the Ukraine situation. But the Ukraine situation is of such sensitivity because we're losing. I mean, I hope people understand this, that we are not achieving our objectives in Ukraine. We are being strategically defeated by our own policy. Um, and the administration can't admit this, won't come out and be honest to the American people. So what it does is it leaks information designed to shape perception. And it's basically the American government at war with the American people about truth. And people need to reflect on what the First Amendment stands for: freedom of press, freedom of speech. It's not just your ability to speak, but it's your ability to hold to account the lies of government, that you have the right as a nation with a free press to expose the lies, that the government can't be in the business of hiding the lies. The government must be in the business of telling the truth. And when it doesn't tell the truth, it is the duty and responsibility of a free press to expose the lies, get to the truth. That's what they do. There's people that say, oh, why are you publishing this? Why are you publishing that? Well, because the government's not allowed to lie to the American people, and the government's not allowed to hide those lies behind classification. But that's what's happening today.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and even right here on this very platform, which I love YouTube. They censor things and they try to shape a narrative, and they're blocking certain people running for president to get access on the Trump side and on the RFK side. These social media companies, they're now very involved, and it used to be, like you say, it used to be a check and balance system that is now unbalanced and unchecked, and it's unfortunate. Let me go back to something that was said a year ago. President Biden said sending F-16 jets would signal World War III, or basically we would be in World War III. Now he's offered Ukraine F-16 jets, training, the whole kit and caboodle. Russia says they're actually very worried about what the United States is doing, because these jets could be retrofitted to deliver nuclear payloads into Russia. And they strongly advise the United States to back off of this escalation. What are your thoughts on the jets? What are your thoughts on Russia's worry about a nuclear payload that could reach Russia?
Well, I'm loath to speak on behalf of Russia, meaning that I don't have any particular insight. Um, what I will say is this: that Russia is the master of escalation management. Um, you know, Russia wants to win the conflict in Ukraine in a way that does not drag NATO into the conflict. And so there's been a lot of effort to create provocations designed to have Russia overreact. Russia has done its own fair share of very tough rhetoric from the very beginning. They said if NATO intervenes in Ukraine, that Russia will use all the resources at its disposal in response, which hinted at nuclear weapons. So, Russia has used rhetoric as well. But let's look at it from the Russian perspective for a moment. Joe Biden himself says that the introduction of the F-16 will bring about World War III. It's not Russia saying that. It's Joe Biden. He says, if we introduce the F-16, it'll bring about World War III. So there's apparently some sort of underlying logic in Joe Biden's statement. Now Joe Biden is saying we're going to provide Ukraine with F-16s. And from the Russian perspective, they're trying to understand how you go from starting World War III to saying it's okay to provide them. And so they have to take a look at what is it about the F-16 that could constitute a threat to Russia worthy of World War III. The F-16 airframe itself is an old airframe. I mean, it was designed in the late 1960s, fielded in the 1970s, and many of these aircraft are older than the pilots that fly them, especially the ones that they're talking about giving to Ukraine. For instance, the Netherlands has acknowledged that it won't provide any F-16 airframes to Ukraine until they've expired their operational lifespan, meaning that they're no longer held by warranty. And so they're letting the F-16s die out by old age and then say, oh, we'll give them to the Ukrainians then. So the Ukrainians aren't getting the newest, best, most airworthy airframes. They're getting old stuff. But that doesn't mean that you can't upgrade the avionics to that. The F-16 can be outfitted with certain avionics that make it a nuclear weapons capable system, a system able to deliver a B-61, which is the American air bomb that we have 100 of them in Europe right now. An F-16 properly outfitted with the right avionics, the right electronics, the right systems can deliver a nuclear weapon. That doesn't mean that that's the F-16 the Ukrainians will get. Far from it. The United States is not going to give Ukraine an F-16 that's been modified for delivery. But from the Russian perspective, why not score political points? I mean, this is an easy one for the Russians because Joe Biden has said that the delivery of the F-16 is World War III. He's now delivering the F-16. So the Russians have every right to ask the question, what is it about the F-16 that makes it so dangerous? And one of the things is that historically the F-16 can be adapted for use to deliver a nuclear weapon. I think the Russians know in their heart of hearts that this just isn't going to happen. But, you know, can you blame them for trying to score political points when the opportunity is provided, especially in this day and age of information warfare? So that's my take on it. That doesn't mean that the Russians believe what I just said. There could be legitimate concern. And the fact of the matter is we need to respect the fact that, you know, the Russians have every right to be concerned about what we're doing in Ukraine. And what we're doing is very dangerous, and it's provoked some dangerous Russian responses. For instance, in Belarus, the Russians have deployed, they've trained the Belarus Air Force and Army to use aircraft and tactical missile delivery systems, the Iskander-M, so that they can deploy nuclear weapons. And they're deploying nuclear weapons onto Belarusian soil. So if there's ever a nuclear conflict, they can be transferred to the Belarusians, who they can then fire nuclear weapons against NATO targets. Belarus is also bringing out of mothballs the old strategic missile bases that used to hold the SS-20 and the SS-25 missile systems. Now the Russians have a system called the YARS, or the Topol-M, which is a mobile missile system. These bases can house that. The Ukrainians are in the business of reactivating these bases so that Russia can deploy those systems to Belarus if necessary. This is dangerous escalation. And so the United States and NATO needs to start to pay attention to what they're doing, because providing F-16s to Ukraine, given what Joe Biden said a year ago, is a very, very dangerous escalation.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think Russia putting nuclear weapons into Belarus. Lukashenko seems like a pretty even-tempered guy, but he is still loyal to his friendship with Putin. And so now, you know, again, once you start having multi-country potential escalation, that's where it makes me very nervous. That this thing, you know, one wrong missile strike or explosion could pull all of us into another world war that takes years and years to put out the flames. I know.
Or in the case of a nuclear war, we'll never put out the flames. We'll all be dead.
Yeah, exactly. I know you can't speak for anyone else, but could you possibly give us some insight? What is going on with Prigozhin of the Wagner mercenary group and the Russian Federation army, and specifically Vladimir Putin? Is this Is this real bad blood that's playing out in the media and frustration, or is this some kind of show to distract us? Is this a sleight of hand magician trick? What do you think is really going on between these two?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that there's no bad blood between Prigozhin and Putin. If there were, Prigozhin wouldn't exist. It's that easy. Vladimir Putin is the commander in chief of the Russian military. And while people call Wagner a private military contractor, the reality is that Wagner works under the auspices of the GRU, which is Russian military intelligence. It's a highly specialized force that is funded using different mechanisms than that associated with the regular army. But these aren't mercenaries. Everybody calls them mercenaries. These are some highly skilled professionals salted in with shock troops recruited from prison. I mean, they recruited tens of thousands of inmates and gave them a 6-month contract. And if they survived the 6-month contract and they behaved honorably, they get a pardon. A lot of people took advantage of that. And these guys were used in some of the bloodiest fighting in Bakhmut. Wagner has proven itself to be one of the more capable military formations in the Russian military, especially when it comes to close quarter combat in an urban environment. When Wagner was formed and when they got involved in Ukraine back in 2014, initially as advisors, the legal structure was different because the Donetsk and Lugansk areas were part of Ukraine. They weren't part of Russia. This is why Wagner was created, because you can't send Russian forces to the Ukraine. It's in violation of the Russian Constitution without the permission of the Russian parliament. So Wagner was created as a private military contractor in name only. They're really military professionals working for Russian military intelligence. But it gave them a little bit of a latitude, some freedom of action. They were able to come up with very streamlined operational procedures, etc. And then this carried on when they started the fight for Bakhmut back in April of last year. They were still a private military contractor fighting on non-Russian soil. But when Russia absorbed Donetsk and Lugansk back after the referendum in September, Wagner ran into a problem because legally speaking, Wagner cannot exist on Russian soil. And so Wagner had to transfer over to Russian military command. And here's where you run into the problem. One, the Russian military bureaucracy wasn't designed to incorporate Wagner. Wagner was a unit that was used to having high volumes of fire to support their tactical, the way they operated in urban environment. Lots of artillery was needed for this. Now the Russian military is expanding from 180 to 300,000 with more volunteers up to maybe 500, 600,000. That means more artillery, which means that the resources that used to be given to Wagner freely, now they had to be shared amongst a broader people. So Wagner started to receive less ammunition. And this angered Wagner because their tactics, which are very aggressive tactics, only work if you can suppress the Ukrainians using overwhelming artillery fire. If you slack up on the artillery, the Ukrainians, instead of cowering down, are able to lay down fire. And as the Wagner assault forces do their aggressive assault forward, they get killed in large numbers. And there's a very dramatic video that Prigozhin did that laid out the dead. It was over 200 dead from one day. He said, all these guys are dead. This is easily 5 times more than what we normally suffer in a day of heavy casualties. And it's all because you didn't provide us with artillery. So he got into a match, and he has a problem with Shoigu, who is the defense minister. He and Shoigu have been going back and forth. Prigozhin, Shoigu has no real military experience. And so there's many people like Prigozhin and others who say, why is he the defense minister? They accuse him of corruption. They accuse him of incompetence. And, I'm not here to pass judgment on Shoigu. I'm just saying that there's reason to maybe sustain some of the allegations of that. Shoigu does not like Wagner because Wagner, their performance standards are higher than most units in the Russian military, so it makes the Russian military look bad. Wagner was getting a lot of publicity, a lot of credit was being given to Wagner. Most of which is deserved, some of which Wagner was stealing accomplishments of other units. And so the defense ministry was upset with that. It got so bad that while I was there, Putin called in Prigozhin and Shoigu together and told them, stop this nonsense. Stop it. I will crush you both. If the next person to do something, it's over. And in recognition of Prigozhin's complaints against Shoigu, he told Shoigu, you will have nothing to do with Wagner in the future. The point of contact in the Ministry of Defense will be Surovikin, the bald-headed General Armageddon. He said he's the one because Wagner respects him. And Wagner got their ammunition. They got what they needed. And as you saw, Wagner completed the capture of Bakhmut. But there's still bad blood there. And right now there's a situation where a Wagner group withdrawing from Bakhmut into the rear area for a 1 month refitting, rest, and relaxation got fired on by a Russian checkpoint commanded by a drunk Russian lieutenant colonel. And so the Wagner has arrested the lieutenant colonel. They have no authority to arrest the lieutenant colonel, and they're putting him on a mock trial. They have no authority to do that. This is problematic. It doesn't mean that Wagner's not right. It just means that Wagner, there's a problem right now with Wagner that in many cases they become too big for their britches. They are an elite organization that's designed to exist in a framework outside of the conventional Russian military structure, and they're now being compelled to integrate into this structure. And there are clashes of culture, clashes of personality. We're going to see what the future is. I think the bottom line is, come this summer when Russia needs to carry out, close quarter combat assaults in an urban environment, they're going to need Wagner to come back. But Wagner's going to have to find a way to cooperate in a better fashion with the regular Russian military. Right now, there is a clash of culture, and it's a real problem. It's a very serious problem, but I do believe it's one that will be overcome.